Hi, it's Ramsey Dewey with the JX Fight Club in Shanghai, China. Today we have a question from our friend BubbleWhip341, who's actually sent me a few questions, and sorry I haven't got around to answering a bunch of them, but a bunch of great questions about jiu-jitsu. I think the first question you asked me, which is not the one I'm addressing right here in my email that I'm looking at, was about the state of jiu-jitsu in China, and yeah, jiu-jitsu is a really new sport in China, and but I'll get into this question you asked me the other day. He says, I've been doing jiu-jitsu for about 4 months, and I was rolling with another white belt who has been here for about 1.5 months. I like the guy, and we're very friendly toward each other, on and off the mat. Recently, I rolled with him, and while doing a double underpass and landing into side control, I elbowed him in the eye with my gi, trying to land my elbow ahead of his neck. This caused a cut under his eye, and he had to stop rolling. After checking up on him and telling him that I was sorry, he was telling me how I rolled too hard, even in technique practice. I didn't know what to tell him, since I felt like I was only using 50% of my strength so that I could focus on doing techniques properly. I talked with other people at the gym, and they believe I am not too overly aggressive in my sparring. I feel terrible about this accident. Do you have any recommendations on how to move on from this event? How much should I adjust my intensity against others? Thanks. Okay, hey, Bubble Whip, thank you for the question. Man, that's an interesting situation. Yeah, fighting any combat sport, they are inherently dangerous sports where injuries can and they do happen. Even when we use as much control as we possibly can, they still happen. And I remember I was rolling with a friend of mine, and he had been recovering from a surgery to correct an ACL tear. And he did like 6 months of rehab or something, and we were rolling really, really light, and nothing crazy happened, but he ended up tearing his ACL again. And man, I felt terrible about that. I mean, that's the worst feeling, where you feel like you have everything under control. You feel like you're doing the best you can to mitigate damage, but it still happens. So, man, I get it. So how do you move on from that? And how do you adjust your game plan? Well, learning to spar safely is a long-term process. It really is. You're going to have to invest as much time into that as you do into inflicting damage. We spend a lot of time in martial arts learning to inflict damage, and one of the important things that you can learn from that process, from learning to dismantle people, is how to not dismantle people. One thing you can learn from learning how to kill, maim, and damage is how to not kill, maim, and damage. So I have 2 children, 2 small children, 2 daughters. One is 6 and one is 3, and I've been training them, especially my 6-year-old, who is very aggressive and loves to grapple and loves to punch and kick. I've been training her since she was a baby. And one piece of advice I would give you, if you don't want to injure people, imagine you're sparring a baby. Now, babies are wild. I don't know if you've handled small children, but they are wild. And they don't have filters, and they don't have the ability to hold back on strength and aggression like grown-ups do. They don't know their own strength. And so when I grapple with my daughter, she uses 3,000% of her strength and intensity and power. Fortunately, it's not very much, because she's a little girl trying to fight a grown man. And she's there going 3,000% while I'm holding her back with my fingers. But if you use that mentality of use a few ounces against many pounds, how would you fight a baby? How would you train with a child? and translate that over to working with adults, I think you can learn a lot. So instead of thinking of like a percent, and I always talk about percentages of power in sparring, and especially with striking. Now, jiu-jitsu, it's a different story, because with grappling, when you learn to control yourself in a way where you're not going to damage your opponent, and you can grapple 100% every single day without injuries, and just keep doing it and just rack up that experience. But white belts get injured all the time. New students get injured all the time when grappling, because they, much like babies, much like small children, don't yet know their own strength. And so it's entirely possible to, in your estimation, use a great deal of control. And you definitely, I absolutely believe you, that you were not trying to hurt somebody. And this happens all the time. I got a scar over one of my eyes here from one of my students who did something very similar, and his elbow dropped on my eye and opened up a big old cut, and blood started spurting out. And he was like, "I'm so sorry." I'm like, it's not checkers, man. We're fight training. We're training to do cage fights, man. He's like, I know, but I'm so sorry. I'm like, I get it. It happens. Don't feel bad. And then not too long after, a few weeks after, one of my students landed an accidental headbutt in the same spot and opened up that same scar again, and it started gushing, and the same deal. But one skill set that I've developed as a coach is the ability to spar with people using violent action against me as if they were small children. And when you are able to do that and still take them down, still pass their guard, still make them tap out, oh man, you're going to learn a lot about jiu-jitsu. A great deal about jiu-jitsu. Remember, jiu-jitsu is the yielding art. There are 3 levels of power in jiu-jitsu. There's the weak power, where we push someone and they don't give us any resistance and they just fall back. And that shows us, well, it doesn't teach us anything about their power or their abilities, just that when we push, they fall. There's the strong power, where we push and they push back. And that teaches us exactly how strong our opponent is. It shows us exactly what their abilities and their weapons are. And it teaches us exactly what we have to do to beat them. Then there's the 3rd level of power, the yielding force, jiu-jitsu, where instead of showing our opponent our full power or not showing them any, they push and we deflect. What happened there? We use an ounce against many pounds. We deal with a brute or a giant as if they were a small child. It's going to take a while. It's going to take a while to learn. That's why we train. That's why you get on the mat again and again and again. I'm not saying never flex your muscles or never use power. Absolutely not. In jiu-jitsu, I'd recommend become the best athlete you can. Learn to use your strength and power efficiently, because that's what good technique is. But make it a goal to handle even the toughest brute as if they were a small child. Long-term goals, lofty goals, will yield results piece by piece along the way. Thanks for the question. If you have any other questions, leave them in the comments down below, or email me at ramseydewey@gmail.com. Thanks for the question. Thanks for watching. Now get out there and train.